Hi guys, I'm Erin and welcome back to my channel. Today I'll be doing a tag video and I'm doing the Hindsight is 2020 tag. I was tagged to do this by Yolene Reeds and I will link her tag video down below so you can check out her answers as well as her channel. And so let's get started with the first question. Question 1. What were you like as an early and learning reader? I've always been a reader, and so when I was young, kind of before kindergarten age even, I remember reading picture books, and I remember going to the library when I was really young and just bringing books home and kind of just reading all the time. I would read everything. I didn't really have specific taste then. I kind of just remember picking up everything. And so I remember going to Barnes & Noble time with a little notebook and a pen and was supposed to be writing down what books I was interested in to ask for Christmas. And so at that point in time, I was too young to really be into new releases and what's new. I just would go to the store, I just pick up things, whatever. And so I didn't really have anything in mind, I guess, like I would now, where I have things on my TBR, on my radar. And so I just went and just wrote down the name of every book. I just started at the beginning of the children's section and just wrote down every book I hadn't read and was just going. I was just down for all of them. So I guess that would be an anecdote, I guess. I would say really encompasses me as an early reader, was reading everything. I also remember in lower school we used to do question 2. What book or book series really got you excited about reading as a kid? So before filming this, I sat down and kind of wrote down some books and series I remember specifically reading in elementary school, because as I said in the first question, I kind of read everything, and so these are the ones from elementary school that really stood out for different reasons during that period of my life before getting to middle and upper. So the first series I want to mention is the Bailey School Kids series, which these are children's chapter books that I remember my mom giving me the first one as a gift when I was about kindergarten age, because around that time we had just gotten a new dog named Bailey, and so she thought, oh, this book series has Bailey's name in it, I should get them for Erin to read. And I remember liking them. I don't think I read all of them. I don't think there was any of these chapter book series where I actually read all of them, but this was a series that was one of the earliest fantasy series I remember being exposed to. It was about these school kids who would encounter these seemingly normal characters, like a janitor or a teacher, and they would end up being mythical creatures like vampires or werewolves and stuff. And so I remember reading a couple of these, but so even though I don't think I read a ton of them, they definitely stick out in my memory as a memorable series from my kindergarten and first grade years, partially because of that connection to my dog, and also it was just kind of one of the first really fantasy books I remember reading once I started getting to chapter books. The next series is the Nancy Drew series, which is truly an icon. And when I was 7 or 8 for Christmas one year, my uncle got me a box set of the entire original 56 Nancy Drew books in the iconic yellow. Blue was the Hardy Boys. The iconic yellow hardcovers, and I had I had these kind of short shelves in my room growing up, and so one full shelf was dedicated to just the Nancy Drew books. And so I actually don't think I read all 56 because, as I've stated before, I am a serial series not finisher, especially when I was younger, but I really liked the series. I mean, it's still influential to me today. Just last month, I was playing one of the Nancy Drew computer games, because they have a bunch of computer games, and I love those still. So Nancy Drew, truly an icon of my childhood. The next series, or I guess it's 2 series, were ones that I remember reading in later elementary school, and those are the Dear America and the Royal Diaries series. So the Dear America series they're both told in epistolary formats with diary entries, and the Dear America series follows kind of these girls in pivotal parts of American history. So same thing. The Titanic, the Great Depression, the Shirtwaist Factory, kind of these just influential periods and spots of American history, and just kind of tells their story. And they're younger girls, so kind of late elementary school age, so the same age as the intended readers. And I loved them. And so the Royal Diaries was a spin-off series by the same publisher that was the same kind of format, but it followed famous queens and princesses and lady rulers of history. And so I loved both of these. I think these series are probably where you could trace back my love of historical fiction to, because I adored these and historical fiction has been a genre I've loved for a long time. And so these were definitely big, influential series of my childhood. The next series is the one I attribute to turning me on to fantasy. As I've said, like, when I was younger, I would kind of just read everything, and I don't really remember having a preference towards, like, a genre in children's books, kind of until this series was kind of the time when I started turning towards fantasy a lot more. And again, I mean, I still read multiple genres, and in middle and high school still did, but this was definitely the one that turned me towards fantasy and kind of elevating fantasy as my more go-to and favorite genre, and that is the Inkheart trilogy by Cornelia Funke. So I absolutely adore this series. This is a series about a girl named Maggie and her father Mo, and Maggie finds out in the first book that Mo has the ability to read things out of stories. So, like, he reads aloud from a book and, like, the characters come out of the book into our world. But in exchange, something has to go back into the world. And so this was a trilogy I adored. I mean, I named Webkinz pets after characters in this series. I loved it so much. And when I was looking it up earlier before filming this video, I learned she's publishing a sequel this year, and I cannot wait. Unfortunately, this series is German, and so the sequel she's publishing will be in German, and I don't know when we'll get an English translation, and German is not the foreign language I know. Why couldn't this have been a French series? But I love this series so much. I definitely recommend it kind of to anyone who's ever looking for a younger series. The next series I want to talk about is the Babysitters Club series. This is another one of those super long children's chapter book series. It had tons and tons of entries, and I read a lot of them. I absolutely love the series. It always made me want to be a babysitter, and I never really did. That wasn't really a thing I did growing up. I was just never a babysitter, but this made me want to be a babysitter or have some kind of club like this. Last year, Netflix came out with a adaptation of the Babysitters Club, and you bet that I freaking binged that. It was A+, reliving the nostalgia. So good. This was certainly a classic of my childhood. The last series of books I want to talk about is really all of Kate Kleise's children's books. The main series she had was the Regarding the series. It was 5 books long. It started with Regarding the Fountain, but this series was told in the format of letters, memos, newspaper clippings, journal entries, postcards. Like, I think this is why I generally now enjoy epistolary format books, was because I loved these books at the time. And so this series follows a class of, I think they were 5th graders, and their correspondence with this famous fountain designer, Florence Waters, who comes to their school to build and design a fountain. And this whole story it's absurd. It's a totally kind of silly, ridiculous premise. There's like, all of the books have this current day storyline, as well as some kind of backstory secret that gets dredged up, as well as the series is completely full of puns. Like, every single person's name is some kind of pun or turn of phrase. Like, for some of the examples, the main teacher's name is Sam In, like salmon. You have Goldie Fish, who is another, I think, teacher in the story. Just like there is Lily and Patty, like they're all just very, like, they're absurd, and I loved this series so much. Like, it was one that I would constantly go back and find on, I went to the same school from kindergarten through 12th grade, and so I would like go back to the library in like my middle school library and like pull this off the shelf in like high school after school and just like reread them because they were such quick reads, and I just love them. In addition to the Regarding the series, she had 2 standalone books that were similarly told in this kind of journal entry, sort of epistolary format. One was called Letters from Camp. That was kind of a mystery set at a summer camp, which I loved summer camp at that age, so loved it. And the second one was called Trial by Journal, where the main character was like an 11 or 12-year-old girl who was serving as a jury for this other elementary middle schooler, because there was like this law that if a minor was on trial, there had to be a minor in the jury as well. And so I just loved all of these books so much. Okay, so the third question in this tag, now that I've talked about a bajillion series from my childhood, has there been a person in your life, real or fictional, who inspired you to be a reader? I would say my mom and a little bit my grandmother, because my mom reads also all the time, a lot, constantly, now and when I was growing up. So like, I just kind of assumed that by you know, living in a house and being raised by my mom who was always reading, that definitely probably influenced me to be always reading. I mean, she took me to the library and like the bookstore, and so that just turned me into also picking up books all the time. And then my grandmother also, I remember when I was really young, like early elementary school, for like a year or two, I would go to her place after school until my parents could pick me up. And I remember her taking me to whatever the local library was with like a wagon and bringing books back with me from the library. So she definitely helped facilitate that when I was early elementary school, so like when I was really that formative age to, I guess, get in the habit of reading. Question 4. At what point did you begin to identify as a reader? As I've kind of mentioned in the previous questions, kind of always. Question 5. How has being a reader shaped your life and worldview? Before this tag, I never really considered this angle of reading before, so I have to think that just kind of the variety I would read and how my parents didn't really restrict what I read all that much. Like, I can think of one time growing up that my parents told me I couldn't read something, which was Game of Thrones. They told me I couldn't read Game of Thrones, so I turned 17. But other than that, like, my parents weren't strict about what I read. Especially growing up at a religious private school, there were other people, friends, and just people in my grade. I remember not being allowed to read stuff that I was reading, like popular things at the time, like Twilight. That was a big one. That some people weren't allowed to read Breaking Dawn when we were in like 6th or 7th grade. But so I never really had restrictions on stuff growing up, and so I kind of read a lot of things. And I would have to think that being able to just read this variety, and being what I have to think has to have helped me be more of like an open-minded person, just kind of in general. So I have to think that has definitely helped. I think reading also has influenced some of my kind of desires for what I want my life to be. I think how much I love reading historical fiction has certainly shaped my desire to travel and kind of the places I want to travel, and just this kind of like sense of wanderlust I often have, because I love travel and I've been missing it this past year. And because I always come away from like historical fiction being like, oh, now I really want to travel to this place that talked about in this book, or travel these places to like see these museums or like historical buildings. And like that's one thing I really like to do when I travel, is see the history. And I definitely think that's probably been influenced some amount by the historical fiction I've liked reading. So other than like that's kind of the extent of like I've never really thought about an answer to that question, so I think that's what I would say. So if you have not done this tag and you want to, definitely give it a shot. It was an interesting tag to think through. And if you've read any of these childhood series I mentioned, I would love to hear what your thoughts on them were, or what your favorite childhood series were, in the comments. And I will see you in my next video.